Om Vang Me Manasi Pradisthida Mano Me Vachi Pradisthidam Aviravirma Edhi Vedasya Maani Sthaha Sutam Me Mam Prahasihi. May our speech be based on the truth revealed in the Holy Scriptures. May my mind meditate on the import of the sacred word of truth. May the self-effulgent Brahman shine in me. May my mind and speech take me to the ultimate truth revealed in the Vedantic Scriptures. Om, peace, peace, peace. So today's topic is parable from the Upanishads. This is also a continuation of the topic that we discussed in the last Sunday lecture, that is mysticism in Vedanta and Christianity. So in the last class, I tried to explain the Vedantic concept of mysticism as a kind of inward journey, homeward journey, a search into our own true nature. And this search for the higher reality begins when we feel that what we get in our everyday life in the sensory world is not enough. When the empirical pleasures in this phenomenal world fail to give us inner satisfaction, higher everlasting contentment, then we start this search, this inward journey for a higher spiritual truth. Now, this is exactly what is found in most of the mystical traditions of ancient spiritual cultures. I can just give an example from St. Matthew 5:6, that comes in as part of the Sermon on the Mount. It is almost it runs parallel to a very interesting episode explained in the Chandogya Upanishad, not the one that I referred to in the last class, but a much more famous one which I am going to refer to in today's class. But before that, I shall just refer to this. So this desire for higher truth, hunger, as he said, blessed are they that hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. It comes in the Sermon on the Mount, St. Matthew the 6th. Now, what makes us develop this thirst and hunger for righteousness? Righteousness, as used in the biblical tradition, should be read in its mystical dimension. Otherwise, often it is interpreted in mainstream theology as justice on the part of God. But, there is a great difference between what a mystic understands in the revealed scriptures and what a theologian understands in the same source. a theologian has to depend upon certain established customs and traditions and hermeneutical tools. In fact, one important sign of a mystic is that he can intimately connect with God without the help of a priest, an intermediary, a prophet, or any of the hermeneutical tools. Hermeneutics is a branch of science that deals with the fundamental principles, the dynamics of interpreting scriptures. But in Vedantic tradition, there are no less than 10 hermeneutical tools, of which 6 are very important. In mystical tradition, verbal testimony is the most important one. But in Vedantic tradition, direct perception, inference, comparison, verbal testimony, presumption, and also the absence of the opposite. These 6 tools are very important. I am not going to those aspects of theory of knowledge or epistemology. Now, coming back to the subject, the statement is, "Blessed are they that hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled." Now, the greatest mystic, who was not only a mystic who had the intimate experience of the divine, but also a great philosopher, who was Mr. Eckhart. Now, Eckhart's uniqueness was that he was willing to accept that there is something that goes beyond the problem of sinfulness. The thirst and hunger, according to mainstream theology, means the inherited feeling of radical sinfulness, which is part of our innate nature. In Vedanta, our inherent innate nature is the divine blissfulness. That's true in mystical traditions of Christianity as well. But the problem is, there is always this big hurdle of the inherited sinfulness. As Augustine said, the doctrine of radical sinfulness, total unworthiness, absolute helplessness, and unrighteousness. So, these problems are not permanent natures of the human soul. And Eckhart said, there is a perfect unity between the individual soul and God. In fact, his highest concept of Godhead comes very close to the definition of the imperishable, formless, absolute reality explained in the Upanishad literature. That's exactly what he means by being. God is being, and being is God, and God gives being. Now, often being is spelled with capital letter B, very much as in Vedanta. Vedanta, if you read Vedantic Scriptures, you find Jiva is mentioned, Atma is mentioned. One big problem for the English readers of Vedantic philosophy is this. In Vedantic hermeneutics, the same word could mean different things in different contexts. So, Shankaracharya's commentary, he makes this point. Atma, in its highest sense, means Paramatman, the supreme reality. Very much what Eckhart meant by the word being, the capital letter B. But there are some contexts where the Atma is, Atman, of course, consciousness. Consciousness is only one aspect, and not even the most important aspect of Atman, from a metaphysical point of view. So, Shankaracharya says, Atman normally should be taken to mean the supreme Atman, the divine consciousness, which is omnipresent, all-pervading, immanent, and transcendental reality, which never originated because it always existed, and therefore which never ceased to be because it always exists. That is beyond definition, beyond description, and which could only be understood as our own inner nature. So, it is not direct perception because it cannot be perceived through the five senses and mind. But it is not remote because it is our real being. Your nearest neighbor is yourself. You cannot have a neighbor which is closer to you than yourself. So, Atman as our true nature can be understood as nothing other than our own true innate nature. So it is most intimate. But we normally do not define or understand ourselves as Atman. If you cannot write in a public, in a test, in a document, you can say what is your name. You cannot write Atman. So what do we write? We write our normal name. And what is that name? That name is only the body, the grossest dimension of our personality. So, in our empirical everyday life, we have to keep telling lies all the time. So, when we say we are X, Y, Z, we mean this physical body, which is the greatest lie. The truth is we are Atman. So, one great modern exponent, he mostly wrote in Sanskrit, he said, the greatest irony of the world is that we have to keep telling lies all the time. When we identify ourselves in this broad world, we have to identify ourselves as son or daughter of somebody or some person, which is only the physical dimension of human relationship. In true reality, we are Atman, which is all-pervading, omniscient. Now, that's why there's a problem. So, there is one aspect, there is one problem in our everyday life. We constantly see ourselves as the physical body. But in philosophical books, in Vedantic books, we read again and again that we are not this body. We are beyond this body. So, we can't say it is intimate in the ordinary sensory sense, because Atman is invisible, but Atman is our true nature. Therefore, Vedanta says it is not remote, but it is not directly perceptible the way we perceive an audio-visual object. Therefore, it is our true reality, but every time we interpret ourselves as something other than our true reality. In fact, Eckhart comes very close to that. That is the main difference. Interestingly, for those of you who have, of course, no access to the old German in which he wrote, but if you read Rudolf Otto's interpretations, you find a Sanskrit scholar will be struck by the similarity. Practically, Otto, or as if he translates Shankaracharya's Sanskrit into old German. That's how strongly it strikes. So he says, of course, his teaching of the unity of soul with God was considered to be a great blasphemy in his own times. That's why he stated last time, a mystic is always a big problem for the theologian. Because a mystic goes beyond theology. He pushes aside hierarchy and ecclesiastical structures that stand between God and man. But then Eckhart says there is absolute unity between soul and God. Of course, he uses only the word God. He doesn't, because he couldn't invent a term which could be which should be a German counterpart of Paramatman, a supreme Atman, because that vocabulary did not exist in the language in which he had to write his books. So very often vocabulary is a big problem in mystical literature. A mystic has to express his inexpressible experiences in a language that is available to him or her, or using the similes and imageries which may not be fully equipped to express the full meaning. So he says, this unquenchable thirst for blessedness is one of the roots of his experience of unity between soul and God. When he uses the word Godhead, if you read the definitions and descriptions, then any Vedantic scholar will find that what he means is Atman, Paramatman, but not what he says. That's because of the problem of vocabulary and language. In Vedanta, on the other hand, the problem is not inherited sinfulness. In Vedanta also there is a problem. As I said just now, we define ourselves as the physical body. But we read in the Vedantic books that we are the supreme, all-pervading Atman. So there is often a conflict. Now, how to resolve this conflict? A Vedantin has a problem, just as the mystic has a problem. Mystic's problem, as I said, is the total helplessness, absolute unrighteousness, misery, and again, the problem of the inherited radical sinfulness. Vedantin, on the other hand, says, this world is a big problem. This life, this embodiment is a kind of imprisonment. The all-pervading Atman, which is omniscient, which is all bliss, which is devoid of all limitations, is imprisoned in a physical mechanism. And unfortunately, that physical mechanism identifies itself as the reality. So this world, this life, birth, all these constitute a big problem for the Vedantic mystic, in Vedantic mysticism, which is called samsara. Very often you find the samsara, of course, in Buddhism and also in Vedanta, it means more or less the same. Samsara itself is a very interesting term. The word is samsarati iti samsaraha. That is Sanskrit interpretation. It means something that flows. Sarit means that flows, a river, a stream. So this life flows from birth to birth. Birth, life, death, and again reborn. This is what is called samsara. And this involves a lot of problems. Misery, unhappiness, all that. Happiness itself is a great impediment in Vedantic mysticism. That's something very interesting. In Vedanta, happiness in the sensory meaning of that term is a big problem. Because happiness in empirical terms, in the worldly sense, is only a momentary experience. That momentariness is the problem. Every experience of happiness and joy in the empirical world has its opposite, unhappiness. Whatever we get in this world, we lose just because we get it from this world. Everything. Anything that is produced has to cease to exist. Everything is relative. So this relativity itself is a big problem in Vedantic mysticism. If sinfulness is the problem in Christian mysticism, the relativity of this empirical life itself, the impermanence, the fact that whatever we experience in this world is non-eternal, is momentary, is a big problem. How to get rid of this? That's a problem in Vedanta. And how to get out of these shackles of sinfulness is the problem in Christian mysticism. Of course, in Christian mysticism, you surrender yourself to Jesus, accept Him as a Savior, then you get out of the shackle of sinfulness and you enter the kingdom of heaven, which is again a word for the absolute blissfulness and happiness, which is something which in Vedantic language is called Jiva Brahma Aikya, which means unity between the individual soul and the universal soul. Now, there is a very interesting parable in the Kathopanishad, which gives a graphic picture of the evolution of the human soul from the grossest material dimension to the highest mystical dimension. The story by itself is not very important, but the story behind the story is very important, the message behind the story. The story is this. There was a little boy, his name is Nachiketa. He's a famous figure in Upanishad literature. I'm not giving you a long, detailed account of the story, the mythological part of it. It's not so very important. It so happened that he found his father was making gift of his cows and property among the needy people. He wanted to be known as a great philanthropist. Instead of giving good cows, he was distributing old, battered cows which won't give you any milk. So the little boy understood the game, could see through the game, and tried to bring some sense into his father's mind and asked him a question: to whom you are going to give me? Because you are performing a ritual which requires that you must give away whatever is most precious to you. And I am your dear son, so you should give me too to somebody. So, kasmai mam dasyasidi. The little boy goes to the father and asks the question. Ditiyam tridiyam sahovaja kasmai mam dasyasidi. 2-3 times the boy went to his father and asked the question, to whom are you going to make a gift of me? The father, of course, was annoyed, told him, well, I am going to give you to the Lord of Death. In modern language, you can say, go and get lost, something like that. In that sense, he said. He didn't say anything other than, I am going to give you to the Lord of Death. No, the little boy really wanted to bring this old man, his father, to some senses. And he literally took that word and started his journey to the home of the palace of the Lord of Death. He reached there, he was away. He waited for 3 days. I'm going too fast because this is only mythological part. And then the Lord of Death returned home on the 3rd day, and he found a small little boy was waiting for him without food, hungry and thirsty. So he waited for 3 days. So as a penance, he said, well, a small little boy arriving in your home and waiting for you, it was a painful thing for him. So he said, as a compensation, he agreed to give him 3 boons. So these 3 boons constitute the central part of the story that I'm going to narrate. The first boon that the little boy asks is, what is the first the most primitive of human aspirations? We want enough to eat, a place to live in, shelter from rain and heat. That's what he asked. And also we should have peace and happiness in our domestic life. So my father should not scold me. I left my home without my father's permission. So when I get back to my home, my father should not be angry with me. He should speak to me very happily. Shanda sankalpa sumana yadhasyat vidamanyam gautamo ma abhimurtyo tuprasishtam ma abhivadet prasida edat trayanam prathamam varam vrine. The first boon I am asking is this: when I get back to my home, my father should not scold me. He should be happy with me. And the Lord of Yama immediately granted that boon. That's not very important. The next boon, and that is much more important. Now, what do we normally aspire for? When we have enough money in this world, a good home to live in, social security, Medicare, everything provided, enough money for pension, nothing more to achieve. It's a terrible experience. They say the problem of affluence is beyond any medical remedy. That's why in countries where the state provides everything, protection, education, Medicare, from cradle to grave, those countries like Japan and Sweden have some of the highest suicide rates in the world. Why people commit suicide? They have nothing else to do. That's a big problem. If you have something to struggle for, something to aim at, it gives you joy. It keeps you engaged. But suppose everything is there. Money, status, no conflict with anybody, law and order, perfect. Everything. Then what will happen? People may become machines, or they may turn to spirituality. If they become machines, they will commit suicide, as happening in Japan and Sweden and some of the most welfare-friendly societies, where the state provides for everything. Fortunately, in America, we are much better because people have to struggle for something. That's a wonderful thing. That makes people engaged and gives them a sense of meaningfulness in life. So, that's a problem. In fact, that's a boon which the little boy is asking. He says, Sattum agnim swargam adyeshimurtyo prabruhitam saddadhanaya mahyam swargaloka amrudatvam bhajante edatrayanam ditiyam varam brune. I'm asking for the second boon. I should go to heaven after death. Now, heaven, according to these traditions, is little different from heaven as it is understood in the Christian mystical tradition. In the mystical writings of great mystics, heaven itself is a spiritual experience. There is an element of eternal blissfulness. You are living in close proximity with God, with Jesus, in that respect. But in Vedantic tradition, heaven is an extension of all the best things that you can have in this world. Nothing more than that. Let us say a 10-star hotel where everything is provided without paying any rent. Now, Nachiketa asked for this boon. And Yama, the Lord of Death, is a great teacher. He didn't hesitate for a moment, immediately granted. Because if people ask for higher spiritual wisdom, then gods are very stingy. They want to test you. That's why most spiritual seekers have to go through some hurdles, some problems, some inconveniences, some difficulties. Then only they will understand the value, the meaningfulness of spiritual enlightenment. If we could get spiritual liberation very easily, very quickly, without paying anything, then we won't really take it seriously. So, it is said, God has a way of making us fit for the higher spiritual experience. So, He makes us go through a kind of hurdles, a series of hurdles, obstacles, problems, difficulties. And then we become fit, and then we get highest. So, when Nachiketa, the little boy, asked for the first two boons, domestic pleasure, happiness, and heavenly enjoyment, material pleasure, he didn't hesitate. He granted immediately. Now, we reach the mystical dimension of the story with the third boon. Now, the little boy thought for a longer time, and he found out, well, he has ensured that I will have all that I want in this life. Money, wealth, good home, everything. And after death, I will be able to enjoy the same comforts, the same joy in heaven for a much longer time. But is there something beyond that? Is there nothing beyond that? Is human being just a creature that could become completely contented if he or she gets all the material pleasures? Is there nothing beyond that? What about life? What's the meaning of life? And what's the meaning of death? Nachiketa is asking for an explanation for the mystery of human life by asking for an explanation of the mystery of death. Because death, in a way, teaches us two important lessons. One lesson for the wise person is, this body is not eternal. Every time when you return from the crematorium, unless people are extremely material-minded, at least for some hours, they become philosophers. Because suddenly the idea, that gentleman was living till now he's no more. So what about me? My fate won't be different from that. What is the mystery behind all this? Is human life something that begins with the cradle and ends with a piece of stone in the cemetery? In that case, there is nothing much to think about it. Then what's the meaning of all that Aristotle and Socrates and Plato and Plotinus and Acharya or Shankaracharya, others wrote wonderful things? What's the meaning of all this? If it begins with the birth in a cradle and ends with a piece of stone, then it's better to make the most of whatever time we have got. No, there is no need to think of mysticism, philosophy, poetry, or spirituality. So Nachiketa wanted to know the mystery behind death. What he actually wanted was to know the mystery behind the phenomenon of life. So he asked the third boon. That is the beginning and also the conclusion of the mystical teachings of this Upanishads. In a way, if you extend the meaning, it constitutes the essence of Vedantic mysticism, if you read the commentaries of Shankaracharya. So the third question that Nachiketa asked the Lord of Death is this. Some people say, well, death is the end of the journey. It's a full stop. And according to some other people, death is not the end of the journey. Death teaches us the momentariness, the perishable nature of body, but along with that, it gives us another higher lesson, the imperishable nature, the immortal nature of Atman that is kept intact, that's left behind even when the body ceases to exist. Please teach me the mystery behind. The language is Ayam prede vejigitsa manushe asti tege na ayam asti di chaige edad vidyam anisishtastoyaham varana mesha varastutiyah. This is my third request. This is my third request. Some people say, when we die, that's the end of the journey. And according to some people, something is left intact, which is immortal, imperishable, even after death. I cannot imagine a better teacher than you to resolve this mystery. So please be gracious to teach me this mystery. And in answer to this question, Yama gives a long description of the mystery of human life. The essence of his teachings is this. He says, this body, this mind, this intellect, all this. These only constitute the vehicle, a medium for the expression of an imperishable, immortal, everlasting reality, which is Atman, which is the divine principle present in everything and everybody. So we have inherited divinity, not sinfulness, in Vedantic mysticism. That's the main difference here. We have inherited this innate, inherent divine nature. Mysticism is an attempt to recover, to rediscover, to re-experience this inner divine nature. In a way, it is a homeward journey. We are returning home. Everything else is a foreign body. The body consciousness, the feeling that we are just these physical human bodies, the mind that gets happy and unhappy, the intellect that sometimes gets joy and sometimes doesn't get joy. All these are superimpositions. All these are alien elements to our true nature. Our true nature is that we are the eternal, imperishable, everlasting, divine principle, the Atman. Even the Atman is really not the name of Atman. You have to remember this very well. That reality is beyond definition, name, or description. But we have to use a language. So Atma itself means that which encompasses everything. The word Atman, when explained in terms of Sanskrit etymology, it means that which is immanent in everything in this world, which is all-pervading, which encompasses everything, which is universal, which by its very nature, divine, blissfulness, divine consciousness. So that's our true nature. And it is present in the tiniest of the tiny things in the world. It is also present in the grandest, at the macro level and so at the micro level. Anohu aniyan mahodu mahiyan atmasi jintohu nihidam guhayam tamakrdu pasyati vita shogaha dhadu prasadat mahimanam atmanaha. This is a famous verse in the Upanishads. So the whole teaching is explained in innumerable verses. I'm just trying to give just a few of these examples. So this reality is present in the tiniest, minutest of the minute particles. That's why out of this universe becomes a living entity. And it's also present the grandest of the grand. When we meditate, when we practice great spiritual and ethical values, we express this inner divinity. When we practice karma yoga, when we practice unselfishness, when we practice broad-mindedness, these ethical, moral values, it's like taking a piece of paper and cleaning the mirror so that the sun will reflect on the mirror and illumination will become more clear. So we make ourselves a better mirror, a better medium for the sunlight to reflect. When we lead good life, this inner divinity manifests more and more. The great mystics of the world, belonging to all traditions and belonging to no traditions, they are all manifestations of this inner divinity. Vivekananda makes a very interesting point, referring to the point. The difference between an amoeba and a Buddha is one of degrees, not of kind. Buddha in Sanskrit means the enlightened one, not necessarily Buddha, the founder of Buddhist religion. Buddha literally means the enlightened one. The spiritually enlightened people, all the great mystics of all world religions, the Christianity, Islam or Vedanta, Hinduism, whatever may be. So, and an amoeba is one of degrees, not of kind. An amoeba is the most insignificant part of living world. There the Atman is manifesting in a very, very low degree, barely. But in the great mystics of the world, it manifests in its full effulgence. In other words, in Vedantic mysticism is a homeward journey. It is an attempt to come back to our own true nature, to rediscover our own true nature. A similar parable is found in the Chandogya Upanishad, which I referred to once some time back, but I shall refer very briefly. It comes in the 6th chapter of the Chandogya Upanishad, in the 14th section. Of course, this again is part of the chapter that I dealt with in the last class, but it comes elsewhere. Here, in the 14th section, there is a story of a man who was traveling from one place to another place, from the western border of India to Afghanistan, Gandhar, to this Kabul. In ancient times, the story is set somewhere 3000, 4000 BC, mind you should remember. So whole is an undivided continent at that time. So one gentleman, old man, was traveling from one city to another city, far off place. On the way, he was waylaid, he was robed, and he was blindfolded and taken away from the main road into the thick forests and tied to a tree, and by robbers, and he started crying and weeping, expecting some passers-by to come to his rescue. And it so happened that one traveler happened to listen to him and came to him, untied the ropes, removed the blindfold, and took him to the road, then told him, look here, this is the road that you should take for your homeward journey. If you take this road, you can get back to your own town, your own home. And he reached that place. This is the simple part of the story. But again, this is the skeleton of the story. Shankaracharya has written a very magnificent commentary on this. So he says, who is this old man who was robed and blindfolded and tied to a tree? We are all like old men. Every sincere spiritual seeker will make an attempt to get out of this blindfold. We are blindfolded by the delusion, by the wrong notions that this world is the only thing to be cared for. Money, wealth, status, material things. These are the only things to be aimed at, to be sought after, to be achieved. And we delude ourselves into thinking that this will give us eternal peace and happiness. But some fortunate spiritual seekers realize that this is not true. So we are all blindfolded, taken away from our track. Means taken into this thick forest of wrong notions, wrong ideas, ignorance, that this world, this material pleasure is the only thing that is worthy, that is to be cared for. And then who are the robbers who blindfolded the man? Lust, greed, anger, aversion, hatred, and so on. All these are the enemies that take us away from our spiritual track. Temptations, that's a word used in the autobiographical mystical literature like St. Teresa's books or St. Teresa of Avila, Philokalia, Brother Lawrence. Many of these books you find temptations. Often it is attributed to the satanic temptations. But in Vedanta, these are delusions, wrong notions, wrong ideas, etc. Now, some people make an attempt. This man was tied and blindfolded, tied to a tree. He started crying and weeping, shouting. In the Upanishadic text, it is said, I am blindfolded, I am taken away from my track, I am here, I am imprisoned, tied to a tree. So please come and rescue me, help me. So some spiritual seekers, out of this, what I may call divine discontentment, well, everything we have got, but still we have to look for something higher, spiritual illumination, spiritual enlightenment. People who are looking for this spiritual enlightenment will start going in search of these ideas. They may read books, they may start discussions on these subjects, they may attend such lectures, and they may slowly start making attempts to get back to the real spiritual track. So this man is crying, so another traveler comes. If you really make an attempt, somebody will come and help you. Accidentally, somebody will come and help you. And then this man is brought back to the main road, and he resumes his homeward journey. And on the road, there may be obstacles. So we should practice diligence. We must continue reading, being acquainted with these ideas by discussion, by meditation, by prayer. We must continue practicing these spiritual sadhanas, doing spiritual practices. That will help us to read the signboards of the road. So which way I should go? Which the direct route to my hometown? So if we practice discrimination, righteousness, and also propriety in associating with people who are fellow spiritual seekers, then we will reach our destination. But we should be very careful not to associate people who are going the opposite direction. Otherwise, you move away from your hometown. So, Shankaracharya in his commentary says, there may be people who are moving the opposite direction. They may also invite you to join their bandwagon. So, we should be very careful. So, we must have a discerning mind, wisdom, enough wisdom to understand whom to accept, what ideas to follow, and how to interpret the signboard. See, when you're driving in the freeway, you should be able to read the signboards. Otherwise, you won't be able to get any help from them. Similarly, in our spiritual life also, we must be able to read the signboards. We must be able to associate with people who are fellow spiritual seekers, because they may have traveled many times, so we are in the safe company. These are very, very interesting ideas. So you find in both mystical traditions, there are many parallel ideas. The similes may be different. Some of the techniques of interpretation may be different, but that difference is due to the difference in cultural or linguistic, geographical differences. So it's a very interesting subject. So I've just tried to give a bird view of this. A very important and very interesting subject. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Pranamastu. Om, peace, peace, peace.